I think I've always struggled to recognize like what was just my family and what was something that was kind of part of the larger community that they had kind of learned through like the church. It feels like we are all collectively doing what our parents fought so hard to prevent us from doing for our entire lives, which is like actually having a voice and talking about like our own trauma. And I think it scares them, and it kind of feels like getting some sort of justice. Yeah, it's nice to see I think there's so many people just kind of breaking out of that cycle. Yeah, it's nice to see everybody just kind of having an outlet to share their stories. I think a lot of people felt like when the group just started, they were like, I had no idea that this was something that was happening in the whole community. I thought it was just my family that was especially weird, but it was all of us.
Welcome to Blinded by the Light, a podcast where we explore stories of spiritual trauma, PTSD, and healing from people raised in cut and other unusual religious circumstances. My name is Baird Lewis, and I was raised in Church Universal and Triumphant, the largest fringe religion to ever establish a presence in Montana.
I'm Justice, and my mission is to communicate with clarity and compassion about the hard, holy, and human. And to that end, I offer hypnotherapy sessions, healing, and I write most gratefully and graciously to express. And I grew up in the church as a kid, and I've moved my search for the truth into lots of different directions. So you can learn more about me at illuminationwithjustice.com.
Our guest today is Annie Newhouse, a young woman who is a child of 5 that grew up with a family heavily steeped in Church Universal and Triumphant. This is part 2 of our interview with Annie Newhouse. We're going to cover issues around food, exploring boundaries with cut parents, why it's hard to leave a religion, why religious people get sucked into QAnon, narcissistic parents, how people heal from spiritual trauma, and more. Since a lot of us grew up with kind of interesting foods that people that don't have granola, people that don't have granola parents, or people that don't have like macrobiotic parents, like some of the foods that you remember, and then do you still eat any of those today?
No, not generally. Like I don't think I can even smell carob without.
It's so bad.
It's so bad.
It's so bad.
Or stevia. I can't stand stevia. Yeah, there are definitely foods that I'm like, I won't eat this because I had to eat it and it's so gross. And then there are some that I'm just like, you know what? I'm not eating that because I can decide that I'm not going to.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Tempeh. Oh, yeah?
my boyfriend was raised by very granola hippies. They were not cut, but they were just more like into kind of, hippie food.
Yeah.
So he's always like, I'm making tempeh. I'm like, great. Like, not interested.
Yeah.
He's always trying to get me to eat weird foods. I'm like, look, I've been there and I don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
Like, I'm sure it's fine.
Right.
You can eat it if you feel like it. My mom is anorexic, so I think my relationship with food was already weird.
Yeah.
But I think that actually, I think, is one of the things that she gravitated to the most in the church, is that she was like, oh, they're super fanatical about food. Me too. So it kind of allowed her to channel that sort of control into like her diet within the church. Which, I mean, it was good that they were getting her to eat something, even if it was like the same 10 gross foods. She was eating something. And I was also thinking about this the other day. I'm actually surprised how into like brown rice they were, because I feel like most cults just give people like sugar because it kind of keeps them tired and they don't have a lot of energy, but they were just giving people like straight protein all the time. Most cults are not into protein.
The control through diet was still a thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And, you know, I remember when I was a kid, I would have my grandparents mail me care packages with like, what was it? Like Pops. Like the cereal, like the cereal, like Pops. Like I loved that cereal.
Oh my God.
And like Milky Ways and like these horrible, trashy, like artificial sweet rolls that you know the ones, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. Like stuff like that. Like I would have like slumber parties and I would have like these care packages mailed and like I got ratted out. Like one of the
Rude.
so rude, right? Like one of my guests' younger brothers told their mother, and she like ruined the party. It wound up being me and my one friend who didn't care, and my mom who didn't really care, and then all the other mothers who had to pretend to care because this mother was like one of those moms, you know? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever have one of those friends where it was like they were just allowed to eat sweets?
Probably.
I had like this one friend who they always just had like all of the good, like Hostess, like everything, and they were just kind of allowed to eat as much as they wanted. And I'd go to their house and be like, what is this place?
Definitely had people who weren't living on staff. I grew up on staff, right? Like in there in the complex, like lived behind the ranch kitchen for 7 years. And there were people who lived in Glastonbury who were a little bit more fringe, and then I knew people who lived on the fringes like in Livingston, and the rules were always a lot more slack. Like we were expected to be like hardcore representatives of the rules for living on staff.
For sure. My mom was definitely like always kind of more fanatical than my dad was in it. So she was always kind of I think she would have been controlling with food whether or not she was in the church or not. But she was just always trying to make like creative sweets out of like she would make like buckwheat pancakes and we'd eat it with agave nectar. It was like, why? Why? She's like, we're gonna take a good thing and ruin it, and we're all gonna pretend that it's just as good. Because she would just make these gross meals and then be like, it tastes the same. It's like, everyone can tell the difference between carob and chocolate.
Well, some little boys couldn't tell the difference between carob and deer turds, so there's that. They're carob-coated almonds, guys. Enjoy.
Oh, my God.
Somebody actually pulled that prank?
That wasn't me. I didn't do that.
Oh my God! You were one of those kids, huh?
Sometimes.
Oh my God. My siblings would just feed me bugs. Or they would be like, we're gonna make you a mud pie, and they would just make me a literal mud pie.
It'd be mud.
And then I would eat it. There was no boundaries in my family.
Right. That's great. Well, that was our next question too, is how does cut-oriented parenting affect boundaries?
I've always struggled to know if it's like cut or if it's just like 90s parents that just suck at boundaries. Because I think that I think that a lot of people in like the 1980s they got kind of hooked into that kind of like selfishness is actually a good thing and you should like focus on you and everyone deserves a Ferrari.
Yeah, good point.
So I think that there was it was like that generation that started focusing on like, you should just like put yourself before everybody else. And then they all had kids, and then their kids' needs were like directly attacking them as people. Instead of it just being like their children, they have needs. It was almost like that whole generation thought they could be parents and also like have a life outside of it and like kind of keep them separate. And I don't know if this is the case with every kid that grew up in it, but I think with my parents, it was almost like always kind of ping-ponging between like just complete neglect and then just like really overbearing attitudes towards like food or like any kind of religious beliefs at all. I mean, my mom was like, she would like be in her room the whole day and I would just be like left to my own devices at like a really young age. But then before bed, she'd be like, did you say your Hail Marys? So it was kind of this weird kind of like duality, I feel like. And I don't know if that's the case with all cut kids. I think I've always struggled to recognize like what was just my family and what was something that was kind of part of the larger community that they had kind of learned through like the church. But I think that anytime there's any kind of extreme religiosity, there is a lack of boundaries because you can't really like program a kid to be like God-fearing and also respect their like need to feel safe. Because you kind of just have to terrify them and traumatize them at a really young age, which I think kind of is counterintuitive to having healthy boundaries.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, the control with food is like a breach of boundaries, dictating like what kids are allowed to wear, like what colors they're allowed to wear. It's all, I really think that they kind of didn't respect any of us as like individuals. I think that, and I think that's something that occurs a lot of the time when people have like a ton of children, is they kind of see it as like you're all like one big group and you kind of have like a collective identity, not like each kid is individual. It's like this is my horde of children and they're kind of just a extension of my own identity. And if they don't kind of conform to that, then they're just like fucking up the system.
Why do you think it's hard for people to leave Qatar? Why is it painful to leave?
I mean, I think it's the same reason it's painful to leave any community. It's really, I mean, I think that's common with cults or abusive relationships. It's the same reason why, like, gay kids stay in their Christian community, like, and stay closeted instead of leaving, because it's, I mean, it's so isolated. So it's like, where are you even supposed to go? I think a lot of people who joined, I mean, my mom didn't have a relationship really with her family for a really long time. So I think it was a mix of like just not really having anything to go back to, but also like if she were to go back, she'd also have to face all of their opinions about everything she believed. And I think there is like a lot of shame in that. I don't think she would have been able to go back and admit that she had joined a cult, especially because when she moved to Pasadena, her parents specifically were like, there are a bunch of cults in California. Be careful you don't join a cult. And then she joined a cult. And so I think if she were to go back, she'd have to be like, I did the thing you said not to do. I'm an idiot, which I just don't think most people are able to do. And I think that when people do work up the courage to leave something like that, I think that their support system outside of it really needs to be very like gentle with them. And I don't think that's the case for a lot of people, which I think is why a lot of people go back.
Yeah, and being isolated. We're in Livingston, Montana, a town of like 7,000 to 8,000 people, and then Paradise Valley even more isolated than.
Oh yeah, I thought Livingston was the big city when I was a kid. I think a lot of the time, like, I mean, just working at Haven, I mean, I think the people that are a lot of the time able to actually permanently leave their partners are people who have a really strong support system outside of it. A lot of the time people that, especially if they have children with the person and they don't have anywhere else to go, like, it's so much more likely that they're going to go back because they don't have anywhere else to go. And it's familiar.
I think that's pretty common for any abusive situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true. And yeah, I think I hear a lot like people saying like, how could anyone join a cult? Like, or like, how could you stay once stuff started getting bad? But I think everybody likes to think that they're stronger and more stable than they really are.
Mm-hmm.
I think pretty much anyone could join a cult if it was the right flavor of cult. I mean, you could see that like in, I don't know if you guys have seen that documentary, The Vow, about NXIVM.
I've been wanting to watch it because I actually met her at a India.
Oh, really?
I used to present at a seminars. My father taught these kind of new age transformational seminars, and I met her at one of those. Her parents and the whole family. I'm really curious to see what happened to her because I knew her as a little girl.
Well, and I think that's such a good example of not all cults are religious.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with religion or even spirituality at all. Because that cult, it was like, this is how you be like a more productive, like entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It targeted like really like successful, like high achieving people.
Yeah.
So I think that anyone could really join a cult if it was like the right thing, because I think everybody's missing something in their life.
Absolutely.
And if you can just pinpoint like what is that person missing and how can you give them a solution to it. I mean, I think Alex Jones is a great cult leader. He was like, what are these people missing? You know,
well, I've been looking into like
masculinity,
QAnon a little bit, and like people are, it's so complex and it's so sticky. I'm like, no, it's actually really not. It's really pretty simplified. They've taken these multi-tiered issues that need specific humane solutions to address them. Specifically, human trafficking is one of the big ones for me. And they've grouped all of these issues that are relevant, and they've created this identity around it that is sensationalized. And then in response to that sensationalization, they have to have this kind of out of this world sort of savior mentality arise as, you know, as a co-dynamic with that.
Absolutely.
It's really pretty fucking simple.
It's super simple.
Yeah.
And it also, I think, because if people were gonna start caring, like if people actually cared about human trafficking, they would care about it when it was happening to Black and brown girls who were not American.
Yeah. Or kids at the border.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
But suddenly it's like these people in the government that they already don't trust are threatening little white girls. So all of a sudden they're like, oh my God. Like, we have to go and save the little white girls.
That's terrible. I mean, it is a massive issue. And there are legitimate pedophile rings, but when you dress it up under this Satanist costuming, it makes it impossible for people who would be willing to discuss this as an issue to take it in and digest it and have a rational conversation.
Absolutely.
It's disheartening to me.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, that's what's so, I think, so frustrating for me is it's like, you know, they're not even necessarily wrong about who is perpetrating these things.
Valid.
They're just wrong about who it's happening to because like Native American people are the only demographic in the US that are largely victimized by people of another race.
Right.
There's a reason why that happens because of all of the conflict of interest with like tribal governments and federal governments. Yet my mom thinks that racism doesn't exist anymore, but also thinks that little white girls are being kidnapped by Satanists. It's like, it's just so like narcissistic to me, where she cannot actually care about things that are happening to people that she has been conditioned not to give a shit about.
Yeah.
But she's created these victims in her head that don't really exist. And she's created, it's like the people she believes are the problem in the world are perpetrating like the worst thing anyone could do.
Right.
So it's really, it just preys off of these people that are like, the victims are always going to be like little white children. And there's like these Satanists coming to like do these like ritualistic
Right.
acts against them.
Well, and it's regrettably, it is part of the problem, torture, abuse, violation. It's all
Absolutely.
part of the problem that needs to be addressed, but it would be so convenient
If it was that simple.
if it was that simple.
Absolutely. And I think that is a common thread with people that joined the cut, is that they're all just so kind of emotionally underdeveloped that they can't have a nuanced perspective on anything. They're like, I need to have a simple solution, and I need to have a very clear victim and abuser.
Yes.
And it has to have a solution that I can create.
Well, and I mean, that is actually the most dominant archetypal myth that we see still running through our culture, is the martyr savior, persecuted, and it's elevated to this standard of glory. It's, of course, it's a narrative that people want to get behind, and you're talking about them doing the most horrible thing to the most innocent of beings. That's naturally going to create inflammatory responses to the sensationalization behind it, which delegitimizes the actual issues.
Absolutely.
Which is very disheartening.
Yeah. And it's funny too, a lot of cults have this thing in common. You're saving the world. Pretty much every cult out there, that's a spiritual cult. You are responsible for saving the world. You are going to make it happen.
Yeah.
And then people go sit in a room and decree for 2 hours a day, or they go sit and they pray, or maybe they get politically active. But more often than not, there's just words, and there's not a lot of action. It's like a bubble. It's like a bubble of talking or praying that doesn't really involve any action, with the exception of some more dangerous cults that are not just dangerous emotionally, but dangerous you might commit suicide or that kind of thing. I don't think Cut really got to that point, with the exception of a few people, not with suicide, but with buying illegal weapons. But
well, they had quite a few guns.
And it's hard to say too that, if she had told everybody, like, the masters are telling me that we are all going to ascend together tonight, I just feel like it is very possible that could have happened. Like, just because she didn't tell people to commit suicide doesn't mean they wouldn't have.
Yeah, or if she had said, they're going to attack us, we need to defend ourselves, then the guns, at that point, the guns could have come into play.
Yeah. I mean, they believed that there was like a hell pit under Livingston.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Whoa. Kind of like,
probably under the paper, right?
Underneath the Livingston Enterprise.
Yes. That is where the gates fell.
That the
Allegedly.
astral plane in the seventh circle of hell was rising up around the Livingston Enterprise.
Well, and that's what was influencing the reporters to write all of this negative commentary about the church. They were under the demonic influence.
Exactly. The headquarters of the demonic group Legion is under the Enterprise. My mom actually, she told me one time, she used to work at it. I think it's where the Walk used to, or the Walk is now. There used to be a bakery, and she worked in the basement, and she'd work at like 4 a.m. making muffins. And she would just go down there and like listen to decrees on her little like Walkman. And she said she had like a vision of Saint Germain in his purple cape, just like grabbing her and just like flying around the tunnels in Livingston, and there's just like demons everywhere.
Wow.
I've heard, like, both of my parents have talked about having like visions like that.
I think it's really common. You'd be surprised how common that is among church people, that a lot of our parents or older people, once they're in it long enough, they have visions where they see masters or angels or any number of these other beings that have been listed that are not even ascended masters, like things from Roman and Greek mythology, and just really funny made-up names.
So I believed that I believed that I could feel it, this presence down on the river, right? Mm-hmm. And I was very acutely aware of the fact that it was not always pleasant, and it was dangerous sometimes. And I remember telling one of the elementary teachers, I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade, I was like, there's a being in the river, and it's not nice. Like, it, there are times we really shouldn't go down there. And she told me, she goes, well, you're making stuff up. The elementals are servants of the ascended masters. They are only benevolent towards humans. And I called it the Kaya, right? That was what I heard in my head. I remember this so clearly. I called it the Kaya, the river Kaya, and don't go down there. It's in a bad mood. So I come to find out later there's a culturally well-known Japanese spirit. What's it called? The Koyo. It's really similar. And it will lure people into the river and steal their anus for a specific hormone that it likes to feed off of. Oh. I just want to be like, take that, elementary teacher. Like, I told you this thing was nasty. It's robbed my butthole. Like.
So did they kill you, or did they just steal your butt?
I don't know. They clearly would.
That is so funny.
Bastards.
That sounds actually weirdly similar to, I don't know if that's a QAnon specific thing, but adrenochrome.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, that's what they're robbing from the children.
They're
right?
robbing from, I don't know if it's from like aborted fetuses or if it's from like, no, I don't think it is. I think that they like kidnap kids and then they scare the shit out of them and then they take some kind of stuff out of their adrenal gland.
Yeah.
And like shoot it up or eat it or something, and it makes them younger, magic or something. I don't know.
So you know what's super creepy about that is
everything.
Everything. Yes, everything is super creepy about
all
that.
Of it?
But there's totally this the Stephen King movie that is a. Have you seen it? The follow up from Dr. Sleep.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's exactly what the demons in that movie do.
It's almost like these people are just reading Stephen King novels and then making up dumb shit and telling my mom.
So disturbed and telling your mom. Annie, it's been incredible having this conversation with you, and could keep going forever. But what are your closing thoughts, and what kind of healing would you like to see going forward?
I mean, I feel like we're already kind of seeing it. I think the Facebook group is really big. I mean, I think especially because it just makes me so happy to see that, because it feels like a bunch of like abuse victims getting together and talking shit about the same dude that they all dated.
Valid.
I mean, it feels like we are all collectively doing what our parents fought so hard to prevent us from doing for our entire lives, which is like actually having a voice and talking about like our own trauma. And I think it scares them, and it kind of feels like getting some sort of justice. Yeah, it's nice to see. I think there's so many people just kind of breaking out of that cycle. Yeah, it's nice to see everybody just kind of having an outlet to share their stories. I think a lot of people felt like when the group just started, they were like, I had no idea that this was something that was happening in the whole community. I thought it was just my family that was especially weird. But it was all of us.
Have you been to therapy yourself?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I've been in therapy for, 6 or 7 years now.
It's kind of natural if you don't want to go into the field. Huh?
Yeah, but I mean, it helped a lot. I've been going to EMDR and somatic therapy, and they've both been extremely helpful. Just realizing that I've been like, I don't remember most of my life because I've just been so dissociated because it was just so traumatic. I think it's important just to talk about things and not necessarily have like an angle, but just be able to actually talk about them too. I think talking about things kind of reduces like shame. And I think that's what all of us are doing is we're just like, you know what, Mom and Dad, we're just going to have a long conversation about everything that happened. And you're not invited because this is a private group. I think that I do see a lot of kids that grew up and it's still really struggling.
Yeah.
To kind of really reconcile with a lot of it. 'Cause I almost feel sorry for kids whose parents were less neglectful, because I think that like the abuse and neglect allowed me to kind of get away from it and be like, I can't deal with my parents' behavior anymore. But then also getting space allowed me to start processing everything else.
Yeah.
And I think it is hard for a lot of kids that were super close to their parents growing up and are still close to their parents and their parents are still in it.
I could see that. And even some of the behaviors with like the more helicoptery parents, like I see some of those parents still have such a massive influence on their grown kids' lives. Totally.
Absolutely. You know, and maybe this is just because my parents were raised Catholic, is when we were growing up, they were like, you know, the fallen ones are taking over the world and you have to prove to us that you aren't part of it. Where I think a lot of kids, it was like, you're a special child and you're going to save the world.
Right.
My parents were like, maybe you can if you're good enough. You got to fucking prove it though. So I think we were always just like, we're not good enough to like save the world from the fallen ones. So we didn't get that kind of weird like superiority complex in the same way that a lot of other kids did that I know.
Yeah. It's confusing.
And I think a lot of those kids are the ones that end up like really struggling to kind of reconcile with all of it. So I think in some ways I'm like, so glad my mom is like a shitty gaslighter, because if she wasn't, I might still be in a cult.
Yeah, I get that.
I hear you, Annie. My parents were maybe one of the more normal families, but I didn't recognize like the more subtle manipulation and subtle emotional manipulation abuse that happened until I was in college and then out of college, and then my dad starting his own cult, and then seeing how his behavior towards us changed like very rapidly, and then now having to probably sever that relationship permanently because of continued breaking of boundaries and continued emotional abuse, manipulation. Like, it didn't really unearth itself for a long time. And now that I'm older, I can look back and see like, oh, there really were some problems there. I thought I was living this like glorious childhood, but now being out in the world, that glorious childhood was wrapped up in a lot of other hard to untangle things. And so talking to somebody like you too, like there's this spectrum of the parenting that happened. Some parents being pretty extreme in the way they treated their kids. And then some parents like, oh, you're the best child in the world. Like, you're this light bearer. You need to go out in the world and do all these things. And for some of those kids, maybe me included, it creates this complex of like, if I'm not working hard and if I'm not like constantly being vigilant, like doing the things that I feel like is my mission, then I'm failing.
Absolutely. It makes it even scarier to see like the actual prophet having that relationship with her own kids. It's so high stakes.
A lot of pressure.
Yeah. You know, I think it's so much to put on a kid. Especially, I think, because I don't think most kids feel like there's some kind of like special soul that's going to save the world, but then telling them that is so dismissive of who they actually are. And I think what's especially sad is that I'm sure that you have a lot of qualities that actually are like extremely like useful and like important that they probably just didn't value at all because they were so focused on seeing you as some kind of like light bearer, child of God.
Yeah, I think that was done to my brother a little bit. My dad asked me multiple times when he was like 9 or 10 years old, do you think your brother's gay? And I was like, I don't know. And at the time it was really hard to process that, because I knew if I gave him an answer that like led him toward that rabbit hole of like, oh yeah, my son's gay, what am I going to do about this? Then, how is he going to respond? How is he going to treat him differently if he's convinced that he's gay?
I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but like with narcissistic parents, there's like the different roles that the kids have. So there's like the golden child and the scapegoat. And then I think there's like the invisible one. And I feel like in that community, like interpersonally in each family, but then on like a grander scale, like Elizabeth had each of those kids. And
I was part of a family of each of those kids.
Yeah, I was too. I feel like that really was like such a common dynamic in the church.
Well, and I think that kind of focus on specialization creates narcissism.
Absolutely. I think anybody that is obsessed with being perfect they're just going to become extremely insecure. And I think insecurity like that does breed narcissism.
Yeah.
And I think that I definitely struggled with like, because I was like a very quiet kid, and I was very like, I was always reading or just looking out the window and kind of kept to myself. But my mom always was like, you're so easy, you're my easy child. And then I got to this certain age and I was like, oh shit, like all of a sudden I'm not easy anymore because I am queer and I'm like becoming more liberal, and having to hear my mom constantly tell my siblings like, I don't know what happened to her, like she used to be so sweet and she used to be like we used to be so close and I don't know what happened. And it was like, the more I started to like come into myself and recognize like parts of my identity that I was never allowed to even explore, like the more I actually became like confident in myself, the more my mom was like, she is like turning into this person that I don't like anymore, and she's becoming so difficult. And I feel like that happens a lot with kids that grow up with parents like that, where one thing my mom says a lot is like I didn't raise my kid to be like such and such, like I didn't raise my kid to be an alcoholic, or I didn't raise my kid to be a socialist. It's like anything we do that steps outside of her boundaries of what she wants for us, it's like she has to make sure everybody knows that it wasn't her fault, because it like reflects on her. Because I think that most narcissistic parents, they just see their kids as an extension of themselves. So anything you do is a reflection on them as people.
I didn't know that. I'm glad you said that, because that definitely reminds me of somebody within my own family.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's healthy to a certain degree. It's part of the survival mechanism that helps a parent bond to their child. But when there is no separation, there's no individualization.
Totally.
Then it becomes toxic.
Yeah. I don't know if this can even really connect into anything. Just that my mom now thinks she can talk to angels. And I feel like there is this underlying, I wonder how many people that joined CUT had like an underlying personality disorder.
That's a
like
valid
just
question.
Paranoia, or I mean, I know that Elizabeth, she had epilepsy, which can cause delusions of grandeur, which I feel like a lot of people have some kind of delusions of grandeur in that church. Probably somebody's father specifically that I can think of.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take that. I'll own that one. Yeah, he just out of the blue claiming that he was communicating with all these masters. And then after Elizabeth died, claiming that he was getting something, channeling something from her.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense too. I think that I think a lot of people that joined had like underlying trauma, and that can
Absolutely.
definitely cause like a slew of mental illnesses. And I'm curious, like that's one of those things that, you know, it would be so hard to study because none of those people are going to submit to a test like that.
Right.
But I am so curious to know like what percentage of them.
I can speak from my own personal experience. Both of my parents are on the diagnostic side of personality disorders. My mom was an undiagnosed. She didn't actually receive a diagnosis of borderline, but she received treatment for it for years.
Interesting.
And my father was on the opposite side of the spectrum with the narcissism.
Yeah.
I think, you know, with both of them, I recognize a deep underlying trauma, ancestral trauma that can be traced through my lineage. And I think a lot of people are under the same, you know, burden, basically, even now. It's like, well, one of the things I think that's appealing about Q is it creates this tribal mentality, and it's so easy to other people from that standpoint, because when we were back in tribal times, others were dangerous. That was how we recognized people from other tribes. And like, you get into a traumatized state, you don't have access to your frontal lobe, you're not relating from a more empathetic, emotionally intelligent place. You know, these people are running around in survival mode, sort of latching onto whatever the thing is that they think, you know, can create a solution. And I think it's just, you know, my final thoughts is like, I get the appeal of wanting something to fix and being able to see something as being the ultimate cure. But we all need to get better at sitting with the unknown.
Absolutely.
It's healthy. It's healthy to have unknowns. It gets unhealthy when people get too fixated on having answers to all these things that nobody knows.
I think that's exactly, I don't know if we can get political, but I think that's exactly why Trump won, is because he was able to appeal to the fears of poor white people in rural areas who are isolated from the rest of the world. Absolutely. Who want to believe that the reason the economy is fucked up is not because Jeff Bezos is hoarding wealth, it's because like some Mexican man is coming into the country to steal his job. Right. And he really was able to exploit those fears that people had because it's a simple solution. Absolutely. And I think a lot of people fall for that. Like, I think that's probably like, I think people need to recognize that, like, anytime somebody offers you a simple solution for a really complex issue, it's probably a cult.
Yeah,
that's a great closing thought.
Yeah, thanks, Annie, for joining us in this conversation, being willing to just bear open like a lot of the things that happen to you and the dynamics that still go on with your family and with your siblings, and in being a part of this group, like, and talking about some of it in therapy, like knowing that I'm not alone. Like before that group, 300 plus people in that group, knowing that a lot of them went through a lot of the same traumas and PTSD and mental health issues, and that people are still unpacking a lot of this stuff today. To know you're not alone, and after years to feel validated, it's a very freeing, like, it feels like a piece of your heart that was missing, or piece of your identity that was missing, is like suddenly that your experiences for years are validated. So, thank you for thanks for being willing to talk to us and share.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. I feel like this is really, it's just nice to talk to other people about it. It's nice to talk to people that I don't have to explain all of it to.
We've went through a really interesting experience together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, I think, and kind of special to have like a I feel like there's this part of me that has always like struggled to connect with people, even my closest friends, because of this thing that I just was like, I know I'm just such a fucking weirdo. And then talking to like complete strangers that I'm like, oh, this is that thing.
Yeah.
Like, you either just get it or you don't. There's a comedian that says, I never want to date a woman who's still has both of her parents living. That's not exactly the same, but I think it is a similar thought, that it's like, it's nice to be around people that have the same trauma, because you just can't explain it, really.
And I hope it'll be beneficial for other people who didn't grow up in the cut, who also grew up in other possibly New Age fundamentalist organizations, or just suffered with the burden of religiosity in toxic amounts.
If you enjoyed this podcast, the best thing you can do to support us is telling your friends and family. Building a community around these topics matters, because having our voices heard can mean greater healing and insights into our collective experiences. Subscribe to Blinded by the Light in your favorite podcast app, or subscribe to our YouTube channel to get the latest episodes. If you'd like to be on the show or want to send us stories for consideration, email the show at blindedpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.